Tennessee is putting its final preparations in spring practice ahead of the annual orange and white game that's coming up this Saturday. So today we were able to talk with running backs, special teams members, and kind of put a bow on this spring 2024 period. I'm Ryan Sylvia, this is Noah Taylor. We're with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network, and tomorrow's a walkthrough, but kind of the real practices are over. We'll start with you in terms of running backs. Obviously a new coach in the room, Darrell Sims, the second time we've been able to meet with him since he accepted the job here in Knoxville. What are your thoughts on what he had to say?
Yeah, just get a little bit of a better idea, what he sees out of this room. Obviously, we know when we talked to him a month ago, he had met these guys, briefly maybe, and it had some time to kind of get to know them a little bit. But now, we're 3 weeks in here, and I feel like spring practice, you can learn a lot about guys, and it feels like he's pretty, he's gelled really well there. You hear the players, they've talked a lot about him. The assistant coaches have talked a lot about him. A guy that's kind of fit in really well, and the players today getting Dylan Sampson's point of view as well, Khalifa Keith's point of view on working with him. But I think the biggest takeaway was just what he likes out of this room, how they've been able to develop, how they've, handled pass protection, how they've handled things like injuries with Cam Seldon, and how younger guys have responded. I think that's kind of been the biggest storyline of the running backs in camp is, how guys have come back from that, Cam Seldon news, a guy who was expected to be, that number 2 running back and take a big leap. Suddenly you find out he's out, but Deshaun Bishop seems like he's stepped up a big way there like he did last spring, a guy who's also coming off injury. And the same with Khalifa Keith, who, touted his ability as a pass protector today. It was something he thinks he's grown at. But I think those are maybe the biggest takeaways. It seems like he's kind of developed those guys really well.
And I'll flip it over to special teams. Mike Eckler, if you've got to listen to that press conference. He's a character to say the least. So we have that on the VolReport YouTube channel if you want to check it out. But he was talking about just the return game, and he was very confident in his guys' abilities, which the quote was, "This will be the best that they've had here," and that's saying something considering D. Williams was on this roster last year, and before D. Williams it was Velus Jones Jr. And you really had some really, really good return games here at Tennessee since Josh Heupel's taken over. But he feels really good about where this return game's at, and I think a lot of that is you have multiple options. He was asked who's kind of standing out in the punt return game. The first name he said was Squirrel White, but at the same time he said there's plenty of guys in the mix. Mentioned Boo Carter when asked about him as a guy that's in the mix. How Boo, he's a freshman, but there's no lack of confidence in putting a freshman back there to return punts or kicks. And talked about how Boo, he doesn't care if there's 5 people watching or 102,000 people watching at Neyland Stadium. He's able to perform and doesn't really care for that. Talked about the mentality of Squirrel White, how he joked that he probably thinks he's like 6'8", 300 pounds with the way he runs the ball. So it's tough to imagine you're going to have a better returner than D. Williams just because of how good he was in that role. I mean, it was a big part of winning a football game when you look at the Texas A&M game. But Mike Eckler seems really happy with where this group is, which is really a positive thing heading into the season with a couple new faces back there. We'll turn to Dylan Sampson, though. He met with the media first year as kind of the starter for this team. Of course, he played his first 2 seasons, but now it's his room. So what were your thoughts on what he had to say?
Speaking of what you just said, it's his room now. I think one of the most interesting answers he gave was he was asked about how valuable those Citrus Bowl practices were, and he said not just the practices, that Citrus Bowl game was big for him going into the spring, because obviously last year you expected a leap out of him and you saw it, but he was behind to start the year anyway. 2 veteran running backs, been in the room a long time, then obviously kind of worked his way into that second spot late in the year. But Jalen Wright had a very historic season. It was hard to kind of work above that. But going into the Citrus Bowl game, obviously by that point Jabari and Jalen had declared for the NFL draft. So Dylan just talked about today about how important that was to be the number 1 guy, and get the bulk of the carries and get that experience. After 2 seasons here, it kind of something he had been waiting for, and getting that. I think just the way he talked about it seemed incredibly genuine about how much that helped him to prepare him for this. And I think it also helps the younger guys behind it, because it maybe made him feel a little bit more like a veteran himself coming into spring, because outside of that, outside of him, it's a pretty young group, and I think that's helped everybody else too. But it seemed like he really made the most of that bowl preparation.
Now flipping back to special teams, we talked with punter Jackson Ross. Last year, getting things started, it was shaky, and that's kind of saying the least. It wasn't good. It was concerning. There was some criticism. Obviously, from Australia, he has that rugby style kick. He can kick with both feet. Some people questioning, is it going to work, is it not? But by the end of the year, I mean, he was one of the better punters in the SEC and in the country. He had a really nice citrus ball, as you mentioned, with Dylan Sampson against Iowa, that I kind of think really maybe boosted him into this offseason with a bunch of confidence. But he looked elite by the end of the year. Talked about how that stretch at the beginning, though, where things maybe weren't clicking, was a really tough period for him. At the time, he maybe didn't see how it'd be beneficial, but he admitted, hey, long term, I think that probably does help you. And now he feels like he's in a good spot. Talked a bunch about kind of that ability to kick with both feet, and how even in Australia, it's not uncommon, or it's not rare, but it's uncommon. And here, it's like a unicorn ability. So Jackson Ross looks like, and Mike Eckler too, talked about the same situation where there's a lot of confidence in Jackson Ross, and he's still a young guy in terms of eligibility, obviously an older guy because he got here later in his life than most college kids, but in terms of eligibility, still has a lot in front of him. So Tennessee special teams, once again, under Mike Eckler, looks pretty impressive. They'll have to figure out the kicking spot. I'm not exactly sure if they have that ironed out at this point. You want competition at the kicker spot, though. You kind of want to keep that fire under guys and see what's going to work best. We'll get an insight on that on Saturday, though, at the spring game. We'll be there, both of us, for that orange and white game over in Neyland Stadium. So head to VolReport.com for our coverage the last couple days leading up to that, and then game day coverage for the orange and white game. Big baseball series this weekend as well against the reigning national champions. LSU will have coverage of that. Kim Caldwell just introduced as the head coach of Lady Vols basketball. We have videos on the YouTube channel. We have content over at VolReport.com. And then men's basketball, the portal's heating up. So we'll see what happens over on the men's side as well. For everything under the umbrella of UT Athletics, though, head over to VolReport.com. Links to everything you need is in the description. Thank you for watching.